Well, I'm George Laurer, and I joined IBM in Endicott in June of 1951. I retired when I lived in Raleigh in 1987. Just about 36 years.
Here are some of the things that you've been involved in.
Well, Bill, I've been involved in many projects. I was fortunate enough to start out with IBM in something called custom systems, which meant we got to build one of a kind of everything. And, well, Bill, one of the machines that I worked on was this card reader programmer. It was used to program tests for the Titan missile. And it was an interesting machine in that we fed cards from this hopper up around onto the drum. The drum could store up to 3 cards, so a program test for the missile could be 3 cards long. If it didn't pass, it would recirculate on the drum. Once it passed, it would be dropped into the hopper, and the next test would be brought up and around. Another project I had was the treasury machines. This was back when the 700 series was in vogue. They had the 8-tube pluggable units, and this unit was built with 8-tube pluggable units, an old thyrotron to protect the diodes.
Now you're going to explain what a thyrotron is, because I don't know.
A thyrotron was a gas tube, and it was one that, like, you triggered it, and then it was like a switch. It would short.
Oh, okay.
And this one was very interesting because what it did is it checked the bias supply on the diodes, and if you lost the bias supply, you could burn out all the diodes in the machine. So this device then protected it. If you lost that, the thyrotron would be triggered, and it would pull down the plus voltages. There's only one problem. It would go off like a photo flash tube, and it was not reusable. But it had a little test button here that says test. Every time you tested it, you destroyed it. We fixed it later. But the treasury machine was installed, I think it was about 1960, and it was a 101, converted 101 machine that fed cards at 650 cards a minute. We fed that into this control unit, which was my design, and that in turn wrote it to the mag tape. Prior to this, all the treasury checks that were printed on IBM cards were sent back to the original issuing department, where they were filed. This system then would print a serial number on the card, simply file the card away, and ship the tapes around.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And we had 6 of these machines. They handled 1 million cards a day, and which was every check written by the government.
In those days.
In those days. Another project that was of interest was the one that we called the Purple Flash. In 1960, the Canadians were about to take their census, and they had designed a big form with marked sensing on it. Mason Cunningham in Endicott built a reader for it, and I was given the job of storing the information read from his reader and then transferring it again to a 727 tape frame. Only this one was built with 650 logic. The interesting part is it had 2,500 thyrotrons as the storage. As I said, each one acted as a switch. And it was, the reason we called it the Purple Flash is when we went to the vendor to have the cables made, he said, what color should we make them? And I said, make them whatever color you want to get rid of. And he made them out of a very vivid purple. So this was called the Purple Flash. As you can see, it had 2 407 type plug panels, so that each bit of the 2,500 bits could be programmed as to where it was going to go on tape.
Oh my gosh.
And this is another picture of the control unit. Now, following that, I built the This was called the 1931 and 1946 Data Transmission Terminal. And what it was, a card reproducer. We read the cards, we sent them to this box. This box then put the information on a phone line, and it was one of the early phone line communication systems.
Wow.
And of course the other one could send it back, and we would take it and we could punch the cards. We had a 650 drum in it, and again it was designed with 650 logic. It's interesting, the panel is halfway down. The reason it was halfway down, it was intended to have a shelf so that a person could sit here. But it was never needed.
It ran on its own, eh?
And this one was a 1940, this is the 1946. And this, okay, now the next one we built was a 1945, which was a magnetic tape transmission system. And one of the more interesting things about this one is we had it set up in California with a receiver in New York, and they were going to have their big show at the, what do you call it, the stockholders meeting. And just to be sure, though, they flew the tape to New York in case it failed.
Demonstrations.
Yes, and here's a picture of the complete unit, again with a 727.
Okay. I don't think I ever used a 727. It came 729.
Well, this was ahead of that. Now, when we got to the 7,000 machines, in the 7,000 machines, our department was given the task of building the I/O gear for the 7,000, which for the 7070. And the first thing we had to do was to build an A model, and everybody had their choice as to how they could build it and what they were going to build it on. We were simply given the chassis to hold the cards. Well, we built ours on a 513 base from 1929 with an old crow's foot base. That was
just to show them, eh?
Well, that's what we had. Other people build them on plywood. We had this thing set up in the test lab, and the grounds were copper pipe, half-inch copper pipe. And you talk about engineers and technicians that were dedicated to the company. This was times that my wife almost divorced me because I would simply come home for a change of clothes and go back to work.
Yeah.
Quite often I slept on at work. One of the technicians working for me was, he realized that we were having a problem with our drum amplifiers. Turned out they were getting too hot. We didn't know what to do with it. And he says, I'll take care of it. And he went home, he unloaded his refrigerator, he took the refrigerator from his home, brought it into the lab, and put the circuits in the refrigerator to keep them cool so we could keep testing until they solved the problem. It was nice. IBM bought him a new refrigerator later. Well, then, one of the things we had was a lot of tape conversions. For instance, people would have Sperry Rand's tapes, or they would have Burroughs tapes, that sort of thing. So we made machines, this Custom Systems Engineering, made machines to read the foreign tape and convert it to a 727 tape. Now, this sounds like a simple job. Well, it turns out it was not too simple for many reasons. One is the 727 needed about 4 power supplies. The competitive tape quite often used 15 to 16 different power supplies, so this was a power supply nightmare.
Wow.
And of course each one had to be programmed, each one had to be different. And we had several of them. We had one for RCA, one for Burroughs. Now, one of the more unusual jobs, and I hope you can see this on the camera, this was a podium that the presidents used during their inauguration, during their inauguration speeches.
Mm-hmm.
This particular one was from 1951. This one was 1963. And what it was, from here down, was a bulletproof shield. There was a second bulletproof shield that could be shot up if either of the Secret Service agents pulled the release lever. You can't quite see it, but here is a picture of of where it was, and I think that one is Kennedy speaking. In fact, here are some of them. This is Eisenhower with our podium. This one is Kennedy in 1963 with the same podium. Then we have Johnson, 1965, and the last time I think it was used was Nixon in 1969.
Amazing.
And every 4 years, it would come back to our department, and we'd have the woodworkers come in and refinish it, and we'd retest it, and we'd so forth.
Just for the inauguration.
Just for the inauguration.
Nothing. Okay.
And the interesting thing was, if anybody ever pulled that release lever, that extra shield would shoot up, and that whole thing would jump foot and a half off the ground. And I know that if we ever used it, the president would have died of a heart attack. They wouldn't have had to shoot him. I think that's about all I have in here now.
That's pretty interesting. That's okay. Thank you.
That's just
Thanks a lot.